Dan, your music sucks.
Man, but it's my favorite mixtape.
This isn't any better.
Gunfire on the streets of Bazistani tonight as mass gunmen attacked a party attended by the Crown Prince.
Where the hell is Bazistani?
Oh, Ben, look, there's a van. 3 miniatures.
Oh, we're stopping. I definitely need to add to my pile of shame, Dan.
Yeah, me too. Come on, let's stop. This looks totally legitimate.
Evening, guys. Don't suppose I can interest you in some free models?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love some free miniatures.
Hello, and welcome to Table's Edge, a Spectre Operations and other modern wargames podcast. My name is Michael. I am your surprise host for this week, and I have kidnapped the other two hosts and tied them up somewhere.
Help us! Help us! Where's the snicker you promised? No. Hey, Michael, we're super glad you managed to find time in your busy schedule to talk about yourself a little bit, about your potentially readers and people who don't know who Michael Charge is. So, yeah, first of all, I am grateful for your blog because I think, if I remember right, I think I saw first time Spectre on your blog site posting and got me into the hobby. So, hats off. Thank you, Michael.
I did too. You must have done really well on that search engine optimization.
Yeah.
Because I typed in Spectre and yours popped up right away too. I remember.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The modern wargames comparison post is effectively like the gift that keeps on giving. So I think every month it's usually the second or third post, just because it has all the good titles in it. So anyone searching for rules will find me probably second or third. So yeah, it's quite funny to spot. But I'm really glad to hear that some people actually like my witterings and enjoy reading it. It's kind of a nice bit of feedback when you spend all your time writing it and you're just like, oh, it's time to see what the internet thinks.
Yeah, I spent a lot of money based on your writings and ramblings about miniatures and small vehicles and pieces of wood apparently.
Yeah, that's the other thing I get a lot of is I should be sending your details to my bank manager to say thank you for it. Like, sorry. But yeah, it's been quite nice to sort of, especially when we had wargame shows, to actually go out and hear a lot of people say like, yeah, it's you. I've been reading your stuff for ages. Nice to see. So it's nice to know it even spreads out across the world. It isn't just in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most impressive blog post I saw from you was this table for, I forgot what's the name of the exhibition, which you made that down not AC 130, but the C 130.
Yeah, so Operation Dragon's Horde, which was a demo game I ran 2017, and I think I went to 3 shows and had quite good feedback. So that was a really fun project. Definitely learned a lot from it. As you saw for the post, it kind of went from do it this way, and then it got to my second show. It was like, I am never ever using cast boards ever again because there is so much mess in the back of my car after every show. So it's a really fun experience. I'm kind of maybe I'll talk some more about potential wargame shows in the future later on in the episode when we get into some more stuff. But there might be some stuff coming about it.
Oh, nice! I'm excited already.
Yeah, me too. So we kind of touched on some how Dan and I found you, but Michael, how did you get into the hobby?
So I will first of all comment that I quite liked how listening to your guys' entry to the hobby was relatively short, and then I had to go and sit and think about how long mine was, and then realize that you'll find people who have much longer ones than me. So I started wargaming with ethics kits when I was got to be 10, 11 years old. So I was kind of really getting into Airfix models and decided I had to have something to do with them on the table rather than just build them and sit there. Painting it was unheard of, so it was all grey plastic and that sort of thing. And of course, being around the same time, being in high school, we had Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer and Games Workshop in general sort of be the entry drug. Now, it should be said, my parents were very clever and they did not let me have any Warhammer because they saw the signs and they knew exactly what I'd be getting into. What they didn't realize was that Lord of the Rings battle game that came out a few years later was basically the same thing but slightly differently packaged. So I managed to get hold of my first box from that, which was the Return of the King box, which kind of got me into collecting and painting. And then did that for a couple of years. Doing it as a kid, you sort of have the limited funds excuse. You only have little small armies and you don't really get into it. And I also had the problem that I used to cheat like a horrible person against like my relatives. But as you eventually learn, that isn't the way to play. My dad refuses to play me to this day. And then you reach university and effectively you learn about other things such as beer and girls. And so you start wargaming. And this all went well until I was doing a master's course, and one day up pops a Kickstarter for Spectre Operations. And as a man who loves himself some Call of Duty and other such things, I was instantly taken. I think it was probably the mercenary or PMC kit with the vectors that was really the ones that grabbed me. I was like, yeah, these are some cool looking figures. I can have these. And wanting a sort of a break from spending all my time playing video games, I kind of decided that, I could get into this hobby. I only need a few figures aside. Pick up a Kickstarter, it could be good fun. And then I realized, it's a Kickstarter, this isn't out until September. And this was, say, April, May. And I was like, okay, so what I'll do is I'll buy some more models and get into it. And so I started off by picking up some hassle-free models, which are very nice models. They're in my pile of shame. I'm sure I'll get into it at some point. But effectively, from that, it escalated. There was the case of if these models are coming soon and the Spectre rules I haven't really tried yet, but there's this set called Skirmish Sanguine, and a company called Empress selling a whole bunch of them. And I was like, I could pick them up there and start building up small armies of regulars and have Spectre for the elites. And then I woke up and I had approaching 2,000 figures of moderns, and it's the present day, and I still have to wonder how on earth I got here, which is my intro to the story. In terms of Spectre itself, obviously the rules came with the Kickstarter, and when there was Spectre mentioned they'd be at Salute, which is the UK's main wargame show, I decided to go hang around and grab a few beers with them, and realised that, so I ended up meeting the crew behind it, having a chat, and then from there, kind of kept in contact with them, getting myself involved, probably more involved than I might have wished, but getting myself in there to talk about the rules and play them and point out issues and see how we went from there. And then sort of as time went on, I basically would be the one who would turn up at the local club wherever it was and just break out this new Ultramoderns rule set and be like, who wants to play some games of this? And so it's sort of grown from there, from trying one rule set to trying a whole bunch to making my own scenarios into sort of writing about them, trying to do it every week or so to sort of have some content out there. It's been a bit of an escalation. So definitely been a fun time getting into it all.
Sounds awesome, very interesting.
Yeah.
My first question would be, how did the guys react to the Ultramodern from playing probably Warhammer or something else?
It kind of varies depending on how you present it. There's lots of people who look at Ultramoderns and just go, no, not playing that, not interested, don't want to even try it. And then there are quite a few people who see the difference in style between Ultramoderns and a lot of traditional games and kind of like, there's less figures and there's more terrain and there's kind of these different elements to get you interested. One of the big things was the club I spent most of the time up in Edinburgh. A lot of the players there would play World War II and play Black Powder era, which are big games that fill giant boards and then take the entire night to do maybe 2 or 3 turns. In contrast, Ultramoderns, the way I'd run them, it would always be much smaller games. You get a lot more action in. And then as part of sort of telling the modern day story, you see a lot of people get inspiration from what they see on the news and what's going on in general, and a lot of game inspiration as well. So kind of that's how the pickup went for people who got interested. And then eventually, by playing it frequently, you'd see people sort of look forward to playing something a bit different. Ultramoderns is a very different style of game to a lot. You can see a lot of commonality, but there's always the extra aspects to it that sort of change how it plays. In some cases, it's like the human aspect of there's more civilians around, or sometimes it's more just, there's bits of tech that you just don't see the likes of in World War II or Black Powder era. So there's lots of things to play around with. I'd also say that in terms of getting 40k and Warhammer players in, having often less rules will sort of drag them in because there's less complexity. It's a lot more about just getting dice rolled, and that kind of gets people a lot more interested. So I'd say it's had some pickups. As I mentioned at the start, some people will just say, "No, I don't want to do this." Occasionally, from veterans of certain eras, I knew that was a big group who wouldn't touch anything Falklands War, for example, because they'd served in it. But in contrast, you find a few guys who are just like, oh yeah, I mean, I did 2 tours out there. I'm really interested in seeing what it's like. And then they come back and play it, and you'd be able to tell them, because they're they're players who don't rush their forces directly into the machine gun fire and actually do proper tactics, which you often see slightly differently with other people.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely other media out there. You see Call of Duty and Battlefront, and there's a bunch of modern stuff kind of in the eye of people where maybe that wasn't around, during the Falklands era, and it's a lot more accepted to game current incidents or conflicts.
Yeah, I think the series or book for Generation War was it Generation War? Yeah, I think
Generation Kill.
Generation Kill. Yeah, sorry. Picks up on that point very good, that people like our generation, so to say, or even a little bit before us, they are more confronted, as you said, with it due to video games and everything, so less sensitive against it. I think that's a big role,
but as we've said before, I wouldn't knock anybody for not wanting to play it, hitting too close to home. I can definitely understand that.
I mean, one thing that I always took care of, because I write a lot of my own scenarios, and we'll get cover this probably at some other point as we go deeper into the horrors of what I get up to. One of the big things I do when running scenarios is I will ask the people involved, hey, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? A lot of people have lines they won't cross. I know a lot of people don't like involving suicide vests or suicide bombers or
absolutely
around sort of when certain groups pop up, you'll see people like, no, I don't want to do anything involving that sort of stuff. There's also the big thing about just if it doesn't need to be on the table, why would you this group's committing a war crime in the middle of the game? It's a bit like it's not needed to make the game or to tell the story, so you don't need to bring in that element of it. There are some people who have utterly no reservations and want to be put into the world as realistic as possible, and they can be quite interesting games. But in terms of general stuff, you have to sort of find a right level of content that matches your audience, which is always the focus. So I wouldn't go to a war game show, for example, where I had a tiny war crime going on the board. I'd always sort of dial it back just to be what's required. At the same time, there are people who are like, give me all you've got, and it's like, okay, are you sure? Because I will go into the depths of the unusual and unconventional explosive section of this spectral book, and I will start pulling things out. And those can be tense games. I think also the other thing with that content warning is that actually you need to get people to start thinking about modern games as less a game and actually focus on them on more of this is a situation. So you kind of got to involve that element of what's my actual goal as opposed to just clear the board of enemies now. You have 5 turns, go, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to start shooting everything. As opposed to, hey, we're not quite sure what the ROE is here. You've got to be careful. And that will pull in a lot of people and get them involved in a way that you don't see anywhere else. In fact, one part of this is I know I'm doing my job kind of well if a player turns to me and goes, I'm not quite sure what I should do here. And you go, good. Is that because of the rules or is that because of the situation? It's like, okay, that's excellent. If it was the rules, then we'd have problems. But if it's a situation, that shows that they're getting involved and they're getting kind of sucked into it, which is always my aim with running games.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That's awesome. It's a very good very good story and explanation of it. And Benjamin was talking just the other day, or yesterday, I think, about bolt action versus chain of command and Spectre in that relation, why people are more stuck into or going for bolt action, which is a more simple game, because it's more on a competitive level. And Spectre and probably, I don't know about Skirmish Sanguine, just what you told me before, and I hope we dive deeper into that later. But Spectre is more like, we all know, scenario driven, so it doesn't matter who wins under the line. It just matters to have this story evolve in itself and by the player's decision, which I think is awesome. Like, you just getting immersed in your game is like one of the most greatest thing, and the reason why we always preach bring the candy out on the table and all the beautiful painted up thing, because it helps so much with the immersion. For me, playing from gray miniatures with cardboard terrain up to now all this detailed painted up 3D printed or whatever terrain hand built.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is definitely one thing where you don't, I guess there are objectives in 40K, but as you said, there isn't a whole lot of maybe human investment or emotional investment in your objective, and you really can add that into Spectre.
As an entity in the wargaming space, I see that bolt action is a net good, because it is a game that is simple to pick up and is backed by a company that will give you all the weird and wonderful models you'll ever want. Because without it, you probably wouldn't get like Finnish armor or Japanese like landing forces, because there isn't really the demand. Stuff that's missing from a lot of like plastic model kits, you won't find, because there isn't the need for it. Bolt action creates that need by creating forces. My problem with bolt action is it's basically 40K-esque with history.
Yes.
I have had some friends who are quite keen on bolt action or have played it, and it's when you start hearing stories like, oh yeah, the most effective tank in mid-war is a British early war tank with multiple machine gun turrets, because it has almost a HE dice for causing infantry casualties, which in other games you sit there and go like, this thing's going to break down or explode. Like, this arm's terrible. But at the same time, I also appreciate that sometimes you don't want to have to sit there and put yourself in a situation. You just want a chance to get some models on the table, to sit back and enjoy and sort of push some models around and create some cool photos you take and have a good time. I often find that, and that's good in the case of that. That's for Warhammer. That's for all sorts of games. You have to sort of balance out the, like, is this game going to be getting me in the mood and setting, or is this really an excuse to move some nice models and play some and have some fun tactical challenges, but not quite fit the period. While in contrast, Command is so, and Spectre and Skirmish Sanguine, it's also focused on what is this time period, what are rules do I have to worry about. So adding in elements like dealing with civilians or dealing with sort of close artillery fire and things like that. That's all the focus point. And I will raise this point that with Chain of Command, I know someone who likes World War II, has a World War II collection, doesn't like Chain of Command because they've had so many bad experiences of the game being so swingy they just couldn't play the game. Well, with Bolt Action, at least, there's a guarantee you'll not be tabled instantly. You'll have a good chance, but stuff like Chain of Command, you might get a mortar round that lands on your commander first game, and suddenly that's a big loss to your morale. Or in Skirmish Sanguine, it could be that your specialist of the mission is taken out in the first game by stepping on a landmine. I mean, it's like, and Skirmish Sanguine especially has rules for as soon as someone takes a casualty, you change from your mission focus from your mission you're on to casualty evacuation, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
And of course, that does kind of ruin the game when you take one step on the board, someone sets off an IED, and you're like, well, I drag him off the board and it's mission over, and you're like, okay, let's restart it, pack it up, do it again.
Sure.
And it's kind of, I think there's a place in the market for, as I've mellowed in my old age of 30, I've sort of realized there's a gap in, like, there's a place in the market for every type of game, from casual stuff at one end all the way up to 6 pages of tables and rolling D100s and all sorts of palaver at the other. And it's just a case of finding, as a wargamer, what you enjoy in the middle of it. If you go say, "Oh, I enjoy playing bolt action," I'm not going to think anything less of you. If you say I play bolt action with power lists, then I might have a conversation about where in the war there was multiple King Tigers and turning up in the desert theater with guys with Sturmgewehrs, but that's a whole other problem.
Yeah.
Also
we'll touch
known as
on
Call of
that.
Duty Vanguard, but we won't get into that.
Maybe some other time.
Pilot 15, this is Delta 1 over. You can do that. Please keep your essence down. We'll engage.
So, Michael, after hearing about how you got into the lovely hobby, how did you end up actually writing making your own blog and starting writing about it so detailed and with so much passion and with so much time, apparently?
So this is another story that we have to go back 10 years. So I started blog writing in general, kind of my final year of sixth form. So that would have been 17. And I was like, I'm going to write a blog about games. I'm going to do game reviews. I'm going to write about like music I like, which is explained why my web address is something horrifying that I do like. I kind of like how often people have to ask me, like, what does this mean? And I'm like, okay, well, sit yourself down and we'll go through it. So basically back in 2009, 2010-ish, I started writing blogs. And this was just a general blog, sort of getting my thoughts out there. Because I really like writing. It takes me a long time, but I really enjoy just getting my thoughts out into a written form and being able to share it around and get people's feedback. There was a problem, which was when I reached university and started learning how to make games, I suddenly realized I didn't want to review them anymore because it felt a bit mean. Because I then learned just how much work it is to do all this stuff. I was just like, this doesn't interest me anymore. And for a long time, the blog kind of just became, oh, well, here I'm doing this, and I'm here. I went to visit this museum, and it became a quite personal blog, and it sat a bit fallow for a while. And then the hobby stuff turned up, and I suddenly realized actually there wasn't anything about modern wargaming. There was a couple of good blogs. Dougie Robinson in the UK is one of the finest like painting blogs to get you into it and just kind of showing stuff. I really like his level of interaction and interest in the thing, and he's a nice bloke to chat to, which is one of the advantages of being in the UK is that we're all quite close to each other and can meet up and discuss. So that was one blog I liked. There were several in in sort of Australia, but there wasn't anything that was like I'm going to focus hard on ultramoderns or moderns and talk about what's available and what's coming out. And so I started off with like, here's the stuff I'm working on. Here's some campaign ideas I might do. Here's the models I've picked up. If you go back far enough, you'll find what was called the Lead Mountain, which was my attempt to categorize how many models I was getting. The fact there are 2 Lead Mountains and none of them finished with all models painted will tell you all you need to know. And then after a while, I just started realizing that, you know, I was getting a lot of traffic, so I might as well make this into a semi-professional thing. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do 2 posts a week. I'll do an update post on Monday, and I will do a feature post on Friday. And that came just after I did the I can't find the name, but basically the Great Modern Wargaming Rules Comparison, which is sort of it's the post that keeps on giving. It's a very quick way to someone who asks on any group, what should I play? And you just go, well, here's a big list of rules, and it tells about each of the rule sets. It could have been a table, but he did write all this nice stuff about it, so we'll have to keep giving him links. And that kind of took up in level of excitement, and sort of I really focused in at that point into my style. And my style was, let's be informative, let's provide information on everything that's going on as much as possible. Try to review as much as possible, which is where the problems start with your lead piles when you start being like, oh, maybe I should buy this, and this, and suddenly you are piles of models deep and you're frantically trying to paint them all up to show. But also battle reports. People play a lot of games and not everyone wants to write about it because it's hard work. It is a pain to take photos all the way through to then have to go write in detail about, oh, well, this happened there, and make it interesting to read. And the way I made it interesting to read was basically finding all the interesting photos and then describing what was going on around them. And at my peak, I was basically doing these battle reports the night of the game. I would get back, I would pack my models up, and I would sit down, and then at 1 a.m. I'd basically get this thing ready to post for 7 a.m. And it was a pretty intense time. It was also really fun because you got all that feedback, all the comments. You could see it being shared around. And sure, you didn't get like big YouTube numbers, but you definitely saw people were interested, and people would then comment about it, and you'd hear like later on, like, oh yeah, I really liked this battle report, or I thought this was really cool. And then 2018 happened, and I hit a wall. And then 2019, I slowed down even further. And then I took a little break. 2020 was 2020. And then I slowly came back and realized that actually this focus on ultramoderns only was kind of driving me a bit mad. It's very nice to have to be known as the ultramoderns guy, but I was kind of losing steam on the whole thing and just kind of lost interest in being that focus. Started taking a break, and after getting really into other war games and trying out things like fantasy and Necromunda and all sorts of stuff, I kind of realized that actually I do still love writing ultramoderns, and so sort of brought it back and really focused in on the new era of ChargeBlog, effectively, which is bringing all these impressions back, bringing back the battle reports, bringing back all the stuff that people enjoy, and trying to keep up that level of kind of publishing and showing off, because as we all know, like, Ultramoderns has grown massively in the past few years. Ironically, just after I stopped, so I do like how all the rules producers were frantically getting things ready for me to come back to. But it was nice to come back to and be like, oh no, there's stuff I can look at now, and there's definitely new releases coming. Thanks in part to 3D printing, which has been an absolute godsend to someone who's writing about blogs and likes making figures. It's like, oh, okay, I'm getting X amount of models every month at a rate that Spectre or Empress or anyone like that have just aren't releasing anymore, because it's no longer really the focus for them, or things have happened, or various sort of changes in the hobby hobby in general.
Oh yeah, for sure. The 3D printer, that's a revolution, and we are right in the time when it's good to be a miniature hobbyist right now.
Yeah, the big question is, if you're talking about Lead Mountain, how big is the resin mountain in comparison?
The rule with resin models is they don't go into the database of models to paint until I've actually undercoated them. Okay. If they're being tested for prints, there's a big pile of grey resin on my desk I don't count, which is basically all the test stuff. But as soon as I undercoat, it's like, oh, time to add it to the database, and yes, I did it on this date, and okay, fine, we're good to go. It's not bad. I will notice, so I do a feature on my blog, I do a project update every month where I have my graphs of how it's all going. Awesome, and I think for the first time this year, sort of October and September were both months where the resin pile was increasing faster than the lead pile, just purely because of the releases that were coming out, and it made more sense to go and get resin stuff. Not helped by people like Combat Octopus and Turn-Based Miniatures releasing fantastic stuff every month, which is really fun. It's like, oh, I got ways I can use this. I should just print it all out, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll paint it at some point. It's fine. I'll push it to one side for now. I'll go do something else. Maybe I'll paint a little bit of it.
Stan and Nino strike again.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just telling Ben the other day that Patreon is like, what did I say? A curse and a
blessing and a curse.
Blessing and a curse, yeah. Because we have so much great stuff, but then I'm always like, oh fuck, sure, again a new release. I need again to print, and I still have some uncured and still on the supports, and you're just adding to the pile, and it's like endless. It's scary but sexy.
It's also the things where it's like, I am kind of reaching the point now where I'm looking at resin, basically 3D printing stuff, and being like, I am so much happy to spend money on buying the STLs than I am to buy metal models. Because the thing with buying STL is, like, if it doesn't work, the only idiot is you. Like, you're the one who snapped the barrel when you pulled it out of the supports or that. Like, you can't tell me, like, oh yes, it was packaged wrong and it turned up badly. It's kind of like, no, you are the only one who can blame. But you can also fix it immediately. So it's kind of this, like, I'm slowly leaning towards, I think that very soon it might be a case of that it's priority for STLs over picking up the actual lead, which will be a very weird moment to reach with the hobby in general. It's not to say I won't buy anything new lead, because like I've said things like that before, and suddenly something will pop up and be like, oh, I kind of actually want that. That's really cool.
I think,
but yeah,
I think I've already reached that point. Obviously, I'm not living in the country where milk and lead flows and honey in the UK, and with the Brexit, for everybody else, especially for us in Germany, I feel it's a heavy hammer. So until I have not managed my lead hill, it's not a mountain but a hill, to overcome. I have a lot of my mountain, and Mount Everest is with plastics, but that's another story.
Don't get into that. You can obviously this is an audio medium, so you can't see the pictures behind me, but there is a big stack of Games Workshop boxes behind me, and plastic's real nice to get hold of, because it's kind of that joy of like building it yourself, which I will admit you get quite a lot of resin, because when you're printing it off, you have that mechanical joy to it as well as the getting it ready at the end. But yes, it's very easy to make plastic mountains because it weighs so little.
Yeah.
So heavy on your soul, though. So heavy.
And the kit bashing factor is poison as well. They're like, I just get this kit because I just want to have this backpack. And
I will say one thing that you very briefly brought up about sort of being in the UK compared to you guys who are obviously in the US and Germany. The UK is you've like certain recent releases made me suddenly realize just how lucky the UK is in terms of getting into the hobby, because you've got everyone on your doorstep. There's so little issue with getting it transported to you. Our internal postal service is pretty good. They don't lose stuff that often. I don't think I've lost a package in the last few years. Like, if it's coming to you, it's coming to you. As opposed to like the joys of international posts plus customs, plus it may not even arrive. And then if it does arrive, if it's broken, then that is just so much time like it'll take to fix. In comparison, like I've had releases at my doorstep the following week from certain companies. It's kind of mad just to see like how fast it can be if you're in the same country. And 3D printing gets around all of that. You kind of would hope that someone you start branching to like, let's just have local creators like printing other people's miniatures, but it's until we get to that stage, 3D printing for yourself is perfect, because it just turns up and it's the delivery is how far it takes you to walk from your desk to your 3D printer and back. And that's it.
Yeah.
Amazon carries the resin for me, so I just prime it's here the next day. Yeah, it's very spoiled.
I'm actually kind of lucky. This is a little bit of an inside baseball. So the company I work for has a very cool scheme where they give you rewards for exercising and giving them your Fitbit information. Turns out how much I walk every month is about equal to a bottle of resin every month. So basically, I'm being subsidized to print more minis.
You lucky devil.
My secret. That's how I print so much.
I'm going to have to talk to my boss about that one.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah. Oh, I'm out of resin. Oh, let's just run the stairs up, down 10 times.
Time to strap the Fitbit to the dog and see what happens. Oh, yeah.
So back to ChargeBlog. One of the main features is a nation called Bazistan. And if you look on a world map, you're probably not going to find it.
Right. So, like most wargamers, you start off playing in the real world. You're like, this is set in Afghanistan, this is set in Iraq. And then you say the words, this is set in Iraq, and someone kind of twitches slightly, and you go, oh, okay, I should have perhaps mentioned this beforehand. And you also start to realize you just don't get certain scenarios in certain locations. It's very hard to do an amphibious landing in Afghanistan. There are ways, it involves canals, but you're not going to be doing kind of certain missions in certain locations. So trying to fit, as a mission builder, your ideas into certain locations, you start to struggle. There is also an element of connection to real-world nations can lead to certain basically people bring stuff to the table which you may not always want. And I feel quite strongly that like I'd rather you focus on the game that's in front of you rather than your preconceived notions. I'll mention a bit more of this in a moment, but so setting my games in Iraq, you would have certain comments fly around, which I kind of sat around and was like, I don't really want that at my games table. I want to just focus on very particular elements of the game. So I decided to make what's called an imagination, which is a really big concept in sort of Black Powder and earlier gaming. Sort of like create your own fake Central European state and have a fight over it. And kind of the level of imagination varies from I've written a Wikipedia page on it and have currency and the various kings and what the weather was like over the past 20 years to I've been watching too many Carry-On films, so all the characters have quite amusing names and all the place names are slightly rude. And kind of finding your spot in the center of that can lead to players either finding it really interesting or players not being interested. So Bazistan was effectively a Middle Eastern nation which I put on the Arabian Peninsula, which effectively consumed Yemen and part of Saudi Arabia. And the idea was that in the early 20th century, when the Saudis took over what is now Saudi Arabia, there was basically this other family, which was the Bazis, who were working with the British. So basically based out of Aden, they would control, they would basically be British puppets in the sense that while the British were looking, they would do what they were told, and then in the middle of the desert, they'd do whatever they felt like. So obviously with this extra power on actually in the nation or in the area, it then meant you could have these battles. You'd have a Middle Eastern nation with all the terrain that you'd use for Iraq or Afghanistan. The variety of environments meant you could have city fighting, you could have deserts, you could have fighting up in the hills. And then by turning Bazistan into two other nations, you then created a war that didn't require one side, which is real, being the bad guys, and one side being the good guys. You had the Republic of Aden, which was a very small, effectively westernized Middle Eastern nation. And then you had the more traditional Bazistan to the north, which would be the aggressor, trying to cross the disputed zone and take over what they thought of as entirely theirs. And this was really fun because you then got to basically bring in people like, so obviously the British support their former colony in Aden. The Chinese and Russians might be providing arms to Bazistan. Saudi Arabia is going to cause havoc because it has to deal with a very aggressive neighbor on its border within like a tank march of the holy sites. So you had all these basically elements you could push together to create interesting conflicts. And then the Yemeni civil war started getting really bad. And I kind of felt a little off about including certain places. And I should have said this would have been after the Yemeni civil war actually started, but being not 100% on the ball as I was, I kind of didn't really hear about it until a lot later. I kind of started thinking a bit maybe using this fictional area might still cause some problems. I actually wrote in 2020 a very big blog post explaining why I wanted to step away from real world conflicts, because I'd read certain books which obviously have come out since our forces have pulled back from various countries, detailing ways in which it's all been horribly mishandled in quite specific and distracting ways that kind of were taking away from my enjoyment of the stories on the tabletop. And I basically looked at that and was like, okay, I don't want to do highly realistic anymore. I want to take one step back and I want to focus on telling the individual stories, focusing on the use of tactics and weapons, and also having a playground that didn't let players bring in their own prejudices to the game. And that's kind of how Bazistan started off this horrifying addiction to what if I created my own world?
So my first question is, how did you come up with the name? I mean, Stan is like a common theme there in this region, but Bazi or Baz,
I think it was just coming up with a big long list and doing my best BBC newsreader voice and work out which one worked best as describing what was going on. So like, you'd sit down with a fake script of like, earlier today, suicide bombs have affected the capital of Bazistan, the Bazi royal family, and he's like, "Oh, these names are working. I think this is working quite well," and that's kind of how I chose my name. I can't even remember what the other ones were because it was kind of like maybe 3 or 4 I'd chosen, and I sat down and worked for them. I was like, "No, this one works." I will admit, technically, a stan in the Arabian Peninsula is a bit iffy because stans are usually Central Asia. Which I'm still surprised no one actually pulled me up on, despite all the people looking at me like, So I'm still intrigued to see what happened with that.
Now they have the wood to make the fire against you. Now that you told us. Yeah, pretty interesting.
I think it's more like twigs to begin with. I'm not sure it's you'll find the wood later.
Yeah, the newspaper, the rolled up one. Yeah. No, pretty interesting, and it's a very good point with the going away from real locations and countries. I have to say I've not thought much about that, but maybe because I have such a huge lack of players and only play with friends, which we talk about everything nearly, and no one of us is any type of veteran or has been in any conflict yet, so we probably don't have those soft spots or potential friction which can come up. But that's something I will definitely consider in the future. I think it's very well thought ahead for every future player and like random player you can encounter on any exhibition or in your local game store.
Yeah, I think the last thing you'd want to do is turn somebody off to gaming because of...
Yeah, I definitely say when doing public stuff, that's really the big point. You're like, oh, hang on, I need to be careful with what I'm doing here. I mean, as you may know, I'm British. I play with a lot of Brits. We have I'm not saying an inflated sense of our worth in the world, but we definitely have, we like, a lot of people like the country we're in. So as soon as you put British figure on the board, everyone's going to be like, that guy's cool, that guy has to do well, that guy has to survive. So when you start having British infantry taking casualties in a big way, you will see, like, I've seen people just start be like, oh, actually, no, I don't really like this. And I think the game fighting season had a very interesting bit of news come out, basically saying it wasn't coming because the writer of it, Richard Clark from the Two Fat Lardies, basically said it was kind of quite affecting to be having all of these fake but still British service personnel sort of ending up in bad ways. And after, like I say, as a part of my step back to look at what I was getting into, I was really being like, yeah, I can actually really agree with this. There is something kind of weird to think about that, like, that figure isn't a piece of metal. It's representing someone who could be my age, who has joined the forces and is now taking a career-ending injury. And if you think about it in that sense versus just, oh, it's only a game, one, it gets you more involved in the game, and two, you do start suddenly think about things like, oh, I'll just blow all the buildings up, it's fine. You get into the headspace of this is a simulation of a war game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Me too.
I still hope fighting season will come out, since we're currently Ben more than me. He's dragging me into it.
The chain of command hype. Yeah. Because fighting season is basically chain of command, but modernized, right?
Yeah. So fighting season is a chain of command variant, which was partially written by a guy down in Australia who was actually an Osprey writer. I'll quickly grab his name because I actually chatted to him previously in the past. It says killing for time. So basically he is I can't find his name. Basically he is a Osprey writer. He looked at chain of command and realized chain of command is perfect for modern day with a few tweaks. Sort of show the fact that modern forces are a bit more kind of faster in one sense, but also more laden down in the other. Everyone's better trained, but you're also up against more varied forces. So there's lots of little tweaks that you realize you could do to chain of command to make into a modern day game. And I fully agree. I think it's as a game that is perfect for doing like platoon versus platoon actions. It's even better for doing modern day with things like the command and control aspect, dealing with the friction of carrying your own body weight in addition to yourself in terms of gear and body armor around. It's kind of very interesting how all those ways can easily fit into this game. So I think that it would be a very interesting game to do, but I can understand like the basic game probably wouldn't be too affecting, but once you get into the campaign level, we having to work out stuff like, oh, okay, well this guy's going home, this is going to do this much to the media influence, and you suddenly look at like the whole thing with modern war is it's not just individual battles, it is campaigns, it is entire like tours of duty where bad things happen and good things happen, and at the end of it, you see how it turns out, and I think that's one interesting aspect. Because unlike World War II, where everyone's going in one direction, there's a lot more variation that can happen from in the same month, which you just wouldn't get. So yeah, I also really hope for the fighting season to turn up. If it doesn't turn up, I am sure that people will start looking at the rules and maybe adding their own tweaks. I've seen there's already a few people doing Vietnam, and I think with a few add-on points, that game turn quickly to ultramoderns.
Yeah, it would be great. Yeah. Maybe they're listening and thinking about Bazistan and switching the whole story up.
Yeah, maybe we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I'd love it if they did, but one day.
One day. We have still Spectre and Skirmish Sanguine. Speaking about Skirmish Sanguine, if you're already in this, what's your opinion and experience? Shoot on Skirmish Sanguine. We all know it, we all heard it, especially reading in your blog, but since recently when I asked you and you went into a little bit more into the details, it kind of blew my mind. I did not expect that. So come on, blow the minds of our listeners as well who don't know Skirmish Sanguine.
Okay, so the main thing about Skirmish Sanguine is it is a game that is very focused on giving you the nitty-gritty of a modern-day firefight, an infantry section fight. So rather than Spectre that might scale up to, platoon-size engagements, which would be interesting to play, but are doable, Skirmish Sanguine is a lot more focused on let's drill down to what these fighters are like as individuals. You're going to have guys in a squad, like, let's say in Spectre, you would have a squad and they'd all be professionals. Well, that squad in Skirmish Sanguine might actually be a combination of guys. So you might have an elite who is your career sergeant who has been in the business for most of his adult life. You can have a couple of veterans who have done a few tours and are there sort of leading elements. And you're going to have your newly arrived guys who are the rookies. They've turned up they've done their 6 months or however long basic training. They've just turned up in theatre. They're about to go into battle for the first time. And Skirmish Sanguine is based around a D100 system, so you are rolling kind of percentile dice. So your shooting value isn't simply like, roll D6 plus whatever to work out. It's like, you need to hit, say, like 50% as an average guy, or maybe you might even have a guy who's 100%. Like, he's a real good shot. But, of course, you then start looking at modifiers, and before you know it, you're struggling to take hits. It's a lot of fires going down range, and of course, all along you're taking suppressive fire from basically every time someone pops a shot off at you. I think Skirmish Sanguine, which I should just quickly say is written by, I should actually find his name before I start pausing to say things like that. Colin Phillips, who is a lovely guy who I've chatted to quite a lot, basically wrote Skirmish Sanguine by taking the game RuneQuest, which is a very old RPG, and bringing concepts of that forward based on, I think he was originally playing like ultramodern games using those RPG rules with a few little tweaks on top. And Skirmish Sanguine delivers in a interesting format a game that is all about, it's like, you'll have lots of firefight, you'll have a lot of action, and you'll then have to deal with the consequences of what you get up to. I do appreciate there is a lot of work involved in the Skirmish Sanguine game. It's not quite as pick up and play as Spectre. For one thing, every character needs a character sheet, so you're going to have to sit down and generate all those stats. You're going to have to roll that up. You're going to have that card on the table ready to mark off wounds and start applying morale tokens to. But in terms of giving you an interesting set of decisions, which at the end of the day, a good war game is, it is a fantastic way of getting that small focus on the board and getting you to play.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. How much?
I should ask.
Sorry, go on.
I'll also add, the game also has a version 2 that's in the works. We're not quite sure when it's coming, but Version 2, even from the test rules, is already quite streamlined. There's a nice flow to it. We're definitely looking at like a game that has seen the flaws of the little flaws in the first version, smoothed them down, and given you a game that still keeps the same feel in the new version.
Awesome. I think you wrote me that the rules are up on Facebook. There's like some group, something for the
yes. There is the Skirmish Sanguine Facebook group has some of the playtest rules for version 2. They're not finished, and there's still quite a lot to be done, but they are a very interesting insight into where the game's going next, with a few little tweaks to turn it from to get rid of some of the elements. Like in the first game, your NCOs were kind of just hits riflemen who slightly better, but in the new game, they've added this whole mechanic based around the idea of tempo, which is effectively your NCO can be generating this by using his command roles to then pass out extra tempo to his buddies, be that giving you extra turn or making you be able to do an interruption action. And all of this ways to basically make your squad act like it should do, as opposed to just being a unit that rolls around the board brutally murdering everything.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there is nothing which comes close to this with the RPG elements. I definitely will check that out. Ben, you will be my test bunny.
Yeah. Unwilling accomplice. No, just kidding. I have the books in PDF form squirreled away, and that is definitely one game that I would like to pick up. I just haven't had anybody be interested in playing it. But hey, if a version 2 comes out, if it's streamlined, that helps sell it. That's for sure.
It also gets rid of some of the more interesting rules where people sort of looked at and went, what is that? What's his body value? What does that actually relate to? And then having to explain it, it makes sense once you explain it, but in terms of grabbing you with that first bite, it can occasionally be a bit slow. I will say there are lots of people who really don't like Skirmish Sanguine. It's every time I occasionally see people mention it, there's always one person who pops up like, oh, well, I don't really like this rule, so it's not very good. And you're just like, okay, we get it. It's not the game for you.
Yep.
Find other games.
You can't please everybody. Whatever. That's fine. And one thing that really grabs me about Skirmish Sanguine is there's a lot of add-ons to it. It's not just the core rules, right? I mean, there's stuff for Africa, and there's stuff for covert operations.
I can see where you're going with this question.
Maybe. We might have an author in the house. I don't know. He's being pretty coy about it, but you had a role in writing one of the books for Skirmish Sanguine.
So when I really got into Skirmish Sanguine, I started chatting to Colin, who's the guy who runs the people who write it, and I expressed an interest in writing scenarios for him. And to begin with, I wrote one which was just released for free on the website, which was all about sort of this Black Watch attacking a position with a warrior IFV in support, putting the fire down as they crossed over the canals at night. And then from there, we came up with the idea that maybe we'd trade some scenarios back and forth. And, I would add some more ones relatively free on the website, and then maybe at some point we'd look into writing a book. So I a couple of free scenarios. I contributed to the Africa book. There's a quite cool kind of PMC team being ambushed by a bunch of militia trying to do a kidnapping, which I still really like. Is one of my favorite missions I've actually written. And then we eventually settled on the idea that we should do effectively a special forces focused version of Skirmish Sanguine, which became Plausible Deniability. And that kind of took a couple of forms. It was focused on special forces, but also we both had some really fun ideas for scenarios based on films and TV and games. And we realized that doing our own spin on them could be a really interesting way to get more people into the hobby and kind of show off what you can do with Skirmish Sanguine. Because with the name, a lot of people assume, it's just for Afghanistan. But no, you can use those rules for pretty much anything involving, two teams, two forces going at it. So we started writing the book. And the book was many scenarios. Basically, we split the scenario in half. We kind of generated basic ideas. We then have the back and forth, do a little bit of play testing. We'd occasionally sort of poke like, hey, this special rule doesn't seem fair, or this one seems like like above and beyond the usual imbalance you'd expect from a story-focused game over a points-focused game. At the same time, we added extra tools, extra bits of equipment. We did a whole section on breaching. even down to like what sort of walls are you going to go through. Like obviously, if you're fighting in Europe, you're dealing with brick and stone and stuff that's hard to breach. But if you're dealing in like parts of the US or Oceania, you've got like relatively thin walls you can kick your way through if you need to. So we looked into this and sort of came up with a quite interesting breaching system. Added extra guns. There's a few mentions in there of stuff that might have come from Spectre models. And I was just like, we should have this in. The AA-12 is a really funny gun to use, and we should have a version of this in Skirmish Sanguine, and it is my only wish that I put this in the game. And that happened, and I quite liked it. But I'm really mostly pleased with how many scenarios we wrote and how detailed we went with them, and how basically quite a few of them are very hard to work out what the initial inspiration was, because we just basically made them like our own thing, which I'm very, very pleased about.
Yeah, I definitely, when I needed an idea for Spectre, if I'm looking for a Special Forces mission, I grab my PDF up on my computer and away I go. And there's a lot of cool. I can definitely see when you say that a lot of them are inspired by film or other media. I definitely see the inspiration, but there's a lot of, like you said, different twists and things that you put in it to make it your own thing.
Yeah, one thing I always get from writing up my own, from basically writing stuff based on other things, be it based on reality or based on other properties. I don't like to just take the serial number off and go with that. I always like to sort of add that extra twist to make it interesting. Be that changing a country to be some combination of things, or be that making a mission from Call of Duty into a tabletop game mission that has a slightly different setting and a different kind of time pressure, which I always really, really enjoy doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how many missions are we talking if you said there's more than you hoped for and you split them half creating?
Oh, I can't actually. I'd have to go and double check this. Which
Micah,
kill time. Well, yeah, it's look. I've slept since I wrote that. That rulebook came out. God, I dread to think when it came out.
Was it not this year?
It's a couple of years old because it came out before I kind of got really focused on other things.
Oh.
Does that 12 sound about right? I'm just if I can count, maybe I don't know. I just did a quick count on the table of contents.
Yes, it's 12 scenarios. So we did 6 each, and the idea was that effectively by doing 6 each, that's a good enough number that we can dedicate enough time to write them, and then also still share them back and forth without being like, oh, I can't look at yours. I'm snowed under by all these my own scenarios. I can do some little sneaky peeks in terms of what people might expect if they pick the rulebook up based on the scenarios I wrote.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Stuff like,
need to
love to
send some people to check out Skirmish Sanguine and maybe generate some money for you so you can have more time to write.
More resin.
More resin.
I will say one thing about doing this expansion was like it was a quite interesting look into just the mechanics of how these books we read and enjoy get written. And one of the things you learn is that like an expansion of a quite niche game, it didn't do. I mean, people played it and people who have it really like it, but it hasn't done the gangbusters you might want it to do. I think is always the way to put it is that like these rules are so focused on specific people that you're not here to make money, you're here to make good content. And I think that's one thing that you have to sort of know about wargaming is that people get into wargaming to make some money eventually. But I think the main thing is that most people are into wargaming to be excited and to spread around what they want to see and what they like, which is always an interesting way to come at it as opposed to pure profit, which ain't gonna happen for ultramoderns just yet. I mean, it's not quite sci-fi where everyone wants it and it can be used for everything.
Yeah. Passion, pure passion.
Yeah, and I have to ask, I know you mentioned the PMC mission in the Africa expansion. What's your favorite mission that you wrote up out of the Plausible Deniability book? Oh, okay.
So
I know they're your children.
Okay, you are asking about children. I have a pair that I really like. So you're gonna have twins. So surprise. Smash and Grab, which is the SBS kicking in the door of a narco compound somewhere in Belize. Perhaps inspired by a Michael Bay film with a rather explosive ending, was one I just had so much fun writing. Because one, I got to rewatch Bad Boys 2, and two, trying to find a very British way of doing things, like why would they blow the mansion up? And it's like, oh well, because why wouldn't they? It's perfectly amusing to come up the beach, get their guy back, stick a runway cratering charge in the lounge area, and make a run for it. And that mission is also good because it is a mission with a time limit. Like, if you stay too long, the army turns up, and at which point you're not going to get out of there. You have to get out as fast as you can. But if you do it well enough the first time, you can sort of sneak your way through. You can grab your man and be out of there just as the army rolls in the front gate. The other mission I really like is, as I quickly scroll through to find it, cargo inspection. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure everyone who has read the briefing for this knows exactly what this is based off. One of the things that really got me into Ultramoderns was the Call of Duty series. It's hard to say anyone who has sort of grown up with that series that doesn't look at that whenever they think of ultramodern wargaming, like, you know, special forces doing cool stuff and these bombastic levels. So cargo inspection is the opening mission of Call of Duty 4, complete with like talking about base plate and all the call signs. And it is also you sneaking around a cargo ship in the midst of a storm as you have your little bird providing gunship overhead. I also quite like that mission because I managed to sneak in the names of the team in that mission is actually my a couple of friends I know. So I have to have permission to sort of sneak the names in. And so operators of renown are now available and that sort of thing. So I really had a good time writing that, and it was just a fun one. It was also fun because it's a skirmish Sangha mission that includes the Little Bird, and helicopters on the board are always laugh, especially when you have the helicopter, because the helicopter rules in Skirmish Sangha, there are actually two versions. You can either use them as an off-board asset, which you just simply recall in with your command skill, or you can place them on the board and around as vehicles, which can be a little concerning when you have a helicopter hovering over the board. And the fact this mission let you have one, but then also threw in the midst of a storm, it kind of meant that you had to sort of take your time bringing this thing on and like knowing, okay, I only have one gun run with this, so I'm going to hit it. Oh, okay, well, the guy on the 50 cal, I might as well take it out first before it causes problems for the rest of the team. So it was basically, I gave both players lots of toys and then threw in a complication, and that's how the game is then fun to play. So I really enjoyed just writing that mission. It is also a mission that I know anyone who has the TT Combat cargo ship, it's kind of designed to use with that piece of MDF, because I keep seeing people buy them and they're always like, a cargo ship, and then you're like, what are you going to play? And it's like, I don't know, but I've got a cargo ship. So it's kind of like a little bit of my love letter to those guys, sort of like, hey, give this thing a go, it should be really good. There is a company in the UK who made a 6-foot long one, and I asked for a price and then wished I hadn't.
I've never heard of that. What company is that?
That's Red Vectors, who now trade as part of Minibits, I believe. Who is someone who? Yes, Pendraka. Yeah. So I've actually, again, with the whole thing about being based in the UK is you meet these people, and so I've sort of this guy I met at a wargame show was just like, oh yeah, I make these buildings. Do you want to take a look at them? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, well, I'm thinking of doing this, and he showed me a phone picture of this 6-foot long cargo ship. I was like, that is, I'm not sure where I'd put that. And he's like, that's the question everyone has when they buy this thing. So yes, it's kind of like it was a love letter to basically anyone who's mad enough to do that sort of stuff. Was that mission, and is one of my favorites. I will keep talking about it until eventually I get around to actually playing it on the full size board as opposed to just the test board we played it on.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and I haven't read. I don't have the book or PDF yet. But when you said cargo inspection and Call of Duty, I knew what you're going to talk and tell about. So yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I need to pick that one up.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. I got mine. I got a PDF. I'm trying to think who has it. Is it Radio Dish Dash? Do they carry?
Yes. Yeah. So Radio Dish Dash has both PDFs and physical copies. I believe physical copies are actually distributed from multiple places, so I don't believe it's too bad for like US listeners who may want a copy. I think that it's basically Phoenix Consortium in the US is sort of their partner.
Yep.
So you might find it there. They do also pop up at wargame shows. Someone in the UK, Studio Miniatures, occasionally has them at bigger shows. So you might be able to find a physical copy there. As there's a picture from the last salute of me walking around being like, oh, that's my name in print there. I'll just take a picture of that. And it was happy to see a few of them being shifted that day, which was quite nice to see.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say it's always nice to see the stuff you wrote being used by people, even if it's, as I mentioned even in the blog part, it's always nice to like people mention it, like, oh, I looked at this, or this was interesting. Like having the actual book, I kind of wasn't too fussed about. If I wasn't in it for the money, I was in it for giving back to people who are interested in it.
That's just what I wanted to ask. So yeah, cool. Get out of my head. You've been too much there the last days, writing with you. Yeah, awesome. We will definitely put the link in the description. You have already guessed it. Check this out. I think it sounds awesome. I definitely will pick it up. And if, just like Ben did, to get some more, like thought food for Spectre or any other games, even if you're not a Skirmish Sanguine player.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of those scenarios can be pretty much dropped into other game systems, especially Spectre. I mean, that's the one that I'm super interested in. And I don't have anybody to play Skirmish Sanguine with yet, so not yet at least. But I definitely plan on using. I mean, have you done that? Any cross-contamination or?
So there was a point where I was contemplating writing effectively a conversion guide. And it was one of these. It's one of these projects you always sit down and just like, oh well, I could do this, and then you just look into it, and it's like, no, actually, that's quite a lot of work to get these things rebalanced. I would definitely say every mission in that book could be done as written in Spectre. So in terms of, well, if it's an elite character, it'll probably be an elite in Spectre. If it's a veteran character, you're looking at professional. If it's a regular, you're going to be looking at sort of trained. Maybe militia the lowest you want to go, but basically there are the way transfer over requires just a little bit of thinking, but it's not too bad. I think where it really starts to struggle might be with some of the special rules are maybe a bit more like, oh, if it's something about like at the end of this phase you're thinking more like turn. If you're thinking about like off-table assets, you tweak it to use the off-table assets available in Spectre, or probably actually in the Jungle supplement has some extra things that would probably come over quite usefully, such as the helicopter mounted machine gun doing orbits around. That's very much a type of thing we've used, especially in one mission based off a certain Mission Impossible scene, which I will leave you guys to enjoy.
Damn it, I need to get it now. I want to read it. Awesome. To come back to Bazistan and everything, to maybe wrap this segment up, there's another thing which is called ChargeReal. So do you want to dive into that as well and share some thoughts?
Yeah, so as I alluded to when I talked about making my own world, ChargeReal was kind of the follow-on from that blog post where I talked about wanting to step away from the real-world politics. And my brain was like, hey, what if you stepped all the way from real-world politics and made your own world? At which point I realized I'd be in serious trouble because that's a lot of work, and thought about it, and then remembered the Ace Combat series, which is a fantastic set of arcade flight sim games. Well, arcade action games where you just happen to be in a plane. I have some questions about how the laws of physics work in that world, and there's certain questions about giant vehicles. But either way, it's the thing about the Strange Reel, which is the setting of Ace Combat, is it is a setting that is aiming to be as realistic as possible, up until the point where it can then start becoming a better setting for the type of action they want to make. So in that case, it's about, let's do a cool realistic world with cool realistic fighter jets, except everyone has fighter jets. They are cheap as heck, so everyone's got them. And there are giant super weapons you can fly into and inevitably do like a fly through a tunnel and blow something up, which all the way on board with. My thoughts from looking at that was like, so what if I took this concept of building a world designed around a specific style of gameplay and then brought it back into a focus on effectively infantry combat, which is what Spectre and Skirmish Sanguine and lots of things like that is all about. Like, obviously, not make it like there are no vehicles, you can fight on foot forever, but in terms of trying to make it into a setting that would let you generate a lot of interesting battles and special forces scenarios and things like that. So I stole the name. stuck my name over Strange, so into ChargeReal, and then started thinking about the countries I wanted to add to it. It's still very much in kind of the early writing process. It will be it's a big piece of work. It's very much a case of building it as I go along, working out what nation's this, what gear do they use, what what's the tech level, what's their military tech level in terms of what I have to worry about. And well, I couldn't leave Bazistan behind. So one of the first areas I considered was Bazistan, which then became the Bazi Empire, which has since been split into different areas that then let me do interesting scenarios. And that's kind of fast becoming like the first conflict zone, effectively, that I will focus on. I'll talk about, like, I'll go over in detail on each of the nations involved, and we'll discuss what are their forces made up of, give you some nice, one day maybe I'll give you some nice charts on what all they look like. And then that'll be kind of an interesting setting that could be used by other people, but more importantly is used for all the games I want to run. And it's maybe a bit less about let's do a running storyline, but a lot more about let's build up how this place works. Like in Bazistan's case, like what's its neighbors like, how's its internal politics, what scenarios can we generate from the goings on of these different political entities. And as part of that also, there's the big focus on, I don't want to make Earth, but we turned it 45 degrees. I want to make an interesting setting. So it's a case of looking at these nations being all like, so yeah, this might be close to the nation, for example, which is Arcadia. And Arcadia is in many ways a Western, ultra-modern, tip of the spear sort of country, nestled on the east coast of a continent. But rather than going for it as an interventionist force worldwide, it's actually a lot more focused on the more covert ways of fighting. So it has a very good set of intelligence agencies. It has access to kind of long-range bombers that can just sort of glide across the upper atmosphere and then hit anywhere around the world. And also they have an awful lot of private military companies, because you can never have too many PMCs in a setting. But then at the same time, this sounds quite good, but at the same time, their population doesn't really allow for a big standing army. So it's all reservists in light vehicles, and in the event of an invasion, they'd be ducking into bunkers, they'd be laying ambushes where they can, sort of fighting on the move, and then hoping their sort of influence in other countries would then be able to sort of shut down any invasion, which was sort of like a way of doing it, as opposed to just going, well, it's the US, except I changed the flag, and they have less land. Which always to me struck me as kind of like a slightly boring way to do world building. I'd rather go a bit big and see what we can do. And I think the final major part of it was having these basic rules that fundamentally change its world compared to our world, which is stuff like there's no superpowers. Like no one nation has ever become the USSR or the US. It's always been smaller kingdoms, therefore you have lots of smaller wars. At the same time, there's no WMDs, therefore nukes can't be used as yes, but I have a nuke, at which point any possible escalation stops. So this means you have a lot more smaller scale conflicts. If you think kind of like sort of going back into history, you look at like Europe in the Middle Ages, maybe not quite aggressive as that, but by minimizing the damage each nation can do, they then sort of increase how often minor stress points turn into full-on conflicts. And by that, it gives me lots of scenarios I can write. So you can do interesting things like, well, what would a Russia that was czarist up until the modern day, how would it handle nations on its borders which are, say, broken away in the past or broke away from another empire? And then you kind of create these interesting situations. And the idea is to build everything from small-scale covert operations all the way up to, with the addition of 6mm gaming, maybe even full-on tank battles in the desert or big large-scale maneuvers. And kind of that's been the focus of ChargeReal, is writing this setting up and creating interesting locations. So it's been very much a work in progress. It's something I very much enjoy, is it you can sort of sit back and have a bit of a write and think about, what would be cool to do. For example, the scenario I'm rewriting this month came from an old game set in Bazistan, and it's basically about robbing a bank. So the original idea was, obviously it's just PMCs going for gold in a Free King style setting. But actually thinking about it, if there's no superpowers, then pirates suddenly become a much bigger problem. So what if there was a nation of pirates who could be hired out by everyone to go and attack different countries? And what if, let's say, one country decided it wanted to steal the gold reserves of its hostile island neighbor, and so they hire in a collection of these piratical folks who will land in landing craft to drive an MRAP up the beach to sort of fill with gold and then drive off, sort of thing. And like that setting, like you mentioned that setting, and people immediately go, "Oh, I can immediately picture like pirate raid but modern day." Or use like or little elements sort of like come to life, and people get interested in these little tweaks in a way that some people just don't get interested in ultramoderns. And I think that little setting lets you still play the really interesting game, that you use the tactics. You still have considerations like, oh, okay, well, we've got to do this quickly because if we don't, their fast jets will arrive. Our pirate air force is maybe not the best thing in the world, and we've got to sort of get ready to kind of like butcher and bolt, as the commanders used to say. And I think that sort of that can lead to some really interesting scenarios moving forward. So that's sort of my that's the little goblin in my brain that dances around all the time when I should be working.
I love it. Put that goblin to work.
That's pretty cool.
I should point out he's also bad enough that he's also doing fantasy settings as well. So it's kind of like there's two goblins in them. They occasionally have a fight. And one's like, "What are you talking about fantasy now?" It's like, "No, we're going to do moderns." It's like, "Oh no, I haven't got enough time to do all these cool projects," which is, of course, the eternal hobby of never having enough time.
Yeah, that's true. So just a quick question. It's not about ultramoderns, but do you have a ChargeReal version for your fantasy games?
Yes, I do. So I have a setting called Midgard, which I know it's the most exciting name of anyone's ever come up with, which is kind of wanted to step away from the traditions of most fantasy games of like, oh, the barbarians in the north are evil and everyone else is the good guys and states like that. And it's kind of a lot more about there is one empire that is ruling this entire continent, but it's split into kingdoms with a case of a scrap. And it's kind of set in a world where it goes in cycles of like empires rise, empires fall, and the next empire will find the ruins of its previous part. And so this combination kind of leads to some interesting things. Like you have some colonial aspects of moving out into the wastes. You've got different empires fighting each other. You've got like kind of 16th century medieval era warbands and mercenaries and free companies. And it's basically an excuse for me to look at Games Workshop figures and look at 3D printed figures and go, ooh, yeah, I quite fancy painting up some Renaissance era guys, or I quite fancy some like high fantasy knights. And then you go, oh, so how can I fit them in? So it's a quite fun setting. And also with that, on the blog, there is an ongoing campaign which I'm playing against my sister, which we kind of have we meet every 2 weeks, so have some time to hang out, which we quite like. And she's really got into the storytelling side of miniatures wargaming. So we're playing through these campaigns and really enjoying that element of, ooh, let's do a new scenario and how does this affect our storyline of our characters and move on from that, which is kind of really fun to get into and really enjoy.
That's pretty cool. But this Midgard has nothing to do with the ChargeReal world. It's not like ChargeReal few hundreds back. Not yet, maybe.
Every so often, I kind of like, oh, I could do it. And it's like, no, that's incredibly kind of up your own backside, just start tying your worlds together. Like
that would be dope. Yeah.
I do kind of enjoy having the separation between the two of them. I do occasionally, but it's like, well, I could have this. It's like, no. One's got magic in, the other one's got tanks. Don't mix the two up. That's how bad things happen.
That is how bad things happen.
Yeah. Just one more question for maybe people, because I was talking with the M from our Discord just a few weeks before, and he started doing his own world building. And yeah, Ben and me got inspired about Bazistan and things. How is your technical progress, or how do you start your world building? Do you have a Wikipedia page type, or do you draw the map and then just a short idea for people who maybe want to get into world building?
Yeah, so if I'd sort of describe the process, I'd really say don't start with a map. Don't start with anything that is structured. Start off with what you're trying to do. What's your goal with the world you're building? Like, if your world you're building is, I want to build a fantasy world that does XYZ rather than the traditional style, then kind of use that as a jump-off point, because that then lets you build up nations and the things you actually need to get started with. I am not particularly creative when it comes to drawing. I'm a programmer, so that means all my drawings look like someone I drew it, and then someone was like, "Oh, it's very nice. I'm going to crinkle it up a bit," and we'll look at it. It's like, I don't know what it is anymore. So I'm very lucky. I have a couple of friends who like doing maps. But to begin with, I will work from the practical stuff. So I'll be like, okay. So take, for example, Bazistan, or the Bazi Empire. My first thought wasn't, okay, what does it look like? What's the population? What's all the stats? The first thought is, what's the military situation? How does it get into fights? And what's the tech level? Because that's what you need for playing ultra-modern wargaming. You don't actually need to know stuff like, what's its population? Like, I don't know. You can go like, oh, well, it's larger than X and smaller than Y, but you don't have to be like, oh, well, there's 2,021 people living in this town, because that doesn't affect the game you play, when it could be done as like, well, I think it's a large town, and that would do all the work you needed to do. By working from this sort of goal focused, you can then be like, okay, so I need this, so I'm going to do this empire has got this sort of gear, so if they're doing this sort of gear, there'll be this tech level, and then you work your way back to doing the Wikipedia page entry. I have a wiki. It's currently public, and I need to actually update it again for some stuff I've tweaked, and I'll provide a link for that. But effectively, that wiki is, you throw in ideas, you write stuff that's emotive, and set the scene. I wrote up a country called the Republic of Shailuz, which is effectively it used to be part of the Tsardom. It then became independent, and this was a country that basically got its independence peacefully. Because it chose the right moment to be like, oh, okay, we'll back out and not give the bad guys any extra guns. We'll be like our own little thing, end of the war, we'll have a chat again. And it's also a country where all of the basically they had a lot of technical schools. So they have things like jets, they have Hinds, they have all of the cool kit. And the reason why this is set up that way is because I wanted a nation that is basically the landscape of Afghanistan, but with a force that's air mobile. So that combination gets you a really interesting ability to kind of like, you land in, you take out bad guys, you pick up and go somewhere else. In a way that if I'd gone from like, oh, what must it look like, and what must its population be, you wouldn't quite get the same focus of how do I make this interesting for what I'm using it for. So that's kind of my focus. Is you start off with the practical side, and then maps and Wikipedias and even names can come later. Like, as long as you have what its important principles for your use cases, and then that works. Obviously, this is different if you're making this for fun and don't have a use case for it. But that's maybe where you'd be like, oh, okay, I'll draw a map and then fill the map in and do it that way. But it's I'm kind of working in a bit of a strange way because I have a very specific use case for what I'm working on.
Well, you're looking at it like a war gamer. You know what you're going to be in for.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sort of. You get me straight to the battles. I don't care about economics. I don't care about politics. Just give me the guns. Have they got stealth bombers? Great. We'll go with them.
So, Michael, you have a very long and storied experience when it comes to wargaming. One thing that I am always curious is to hear what advice people would give for a person who is new to our hobby. Do you have any sage advice that you'd want to give somebody? Or someone who walks up to one of your demo tables and is like, I really like this. What do I do next?
Well, first of all, don't. No. Honestly, I think the way with getting into the hobby is start small. Focus on something that really excites you and try and do that element for like as your starting bit. There is something very satisfying about finishing a project as opposed to just falling into the mire that is a full-on hobby. Like when you finish an army or a force or even just getting like a set of terrain together for a table, that is such a good experience, and it gives you that motivation to push on to do the next bit of hobby. But at the same time, I'd also be very quick to say, like, hey, don't, at the same time as focusing, don't focus too hard. As I mentioned, I lost a lot of interest in the hobby just because I was so focused on moderns, because I wasn't trying out other stuff. And if you lose that focus, then very quickly you start hating the hobby, and very quickly you'll stop doing it. And when you stop doing it, it takes effort to get back into it. And it takes And it can be not painful, but it can like just require a lot more effort than you really want to do, just to get your ass back in gear, to pick up the paintbrush or the modeling glue or the scenario you were working on and get back on the horse with it. So it's kind of that thing of knowing when to stay firm and knowing when to sort of bend in the breeze of what you fancy doing, because you'll soon find out that actually you will learn things by doing other elements of the hobby that you wouldn't have learned if you'd done just one piece. Painting up a gang for Necromunda is a very different experience to painting up Ultramodern, but once you do it, you can suddenly go, oh, hang on, if I do this technique, I can actually make my Ultramoderns more vibrant, or I can, make my terrain have a bit more interesting gribbles because I know that if I do this texture for this other element, it works even better. So that's kind of my advice is to have that back and forth, is to know when to push and know when to pause and focus on the project you're currently focusing on. For Ultramodern specifically, I would recommend you find a rulebook, you find a set of figures maybe, and then go from that. But you can get started on wargaming with bits of cardboard and poker chips. You don't need... I'm going to get told off of this. You don't need thousands of models and all the painted terrain in the world and everything like that. You just need like something that you can get around and start playing the game with. And of course, it won't look as neat, but that comes later once you decide, oh yes, I really like this. Let's get some models out. Let's get the terrain out. Let's get all stuck in. And obviously, it's easier to bribe your friends into playing if you've got nice painted minis to show them. So I'd really say it is start small, start focused, but then know when to expand and when to start enjoying the other aspects of it.
Yeah, it's very good.
Actually, one final point. The final thing to say is this. You don't have to do every part of a hobby. Not everyone who wants to play games wants to paint models or build armies. Sometimes you just want to paint. Sometimes you just want to paint. Sometimes you just want to model. Sometimes you just want to play. And there are ways around doing this. Like you might get a friend who loves painting to do the painting side, or you might be that if you've got the money, you go and get a commissioner to do it. There's no shame in sending off your collection every month to someone else to make them look good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny, we were just talking about that earlier. Same exact point.
We were not commenting about it. Yeah.
No, I would never hold that against anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny, I started with Spectre because it was so appealing that they said you just need 4 miniatures. But with my first order...
That is a lie. That's the biggest lie of every skirmish wargame ever says, oh, I only need a gang, or I only need 4 miniatures. And it's like, but what if you're playing in different terrain? You're like, well, now I need 8 miniatures. And then before you know it, you're like, I have more skirmish figures than I would do for a proper army. I'm not sure how this happened.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, we heard something about a Patreon. And we read about something on the Discord and on your blog. Can you tell them a little bit more? What can we expect? What can a person expect from your Patreon? What are the things you're going to offer there exclusively, if at all?
So here's the thing. I don't like locking content behind paywalls. Because this is a hobby, I kind of like to give as much as I can back. It's my free time. I'm really just giving it. I'd be if it wasn't being paid, I'd still be doing this stuff, and that's always sort of the main goal. Having a Patreon is basically a nice big tip jar that people can throw into every month. I still have a normal tip jar, and I get the occasional bit in, but I think a lot of people do a tip jar once and they go off and never look at it ever again because they're like, oh, well, it's tip jar, whatever. I'll do something else. I'll go read some more figures. No, read some more books and look at some more figures. So doing with Patreon effectively lets you do a little bit every month. And I don't have tiers. I don't have massive amount of content locked behind goals. It's all basically pay what you want, and you can be anything from $1 up to 20 quid to whatever bizarre. I've had some interesting foreign currencies come in, which I look at and how. What is that? What's that in English money? Tick, 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 tick. Oh, okay. Huh. And it's very interesting to have people be involved and look in at the stuff I'm working on. So as a patron, you get satisfaction that I'm working away on stuff I want to work on, which is priceless. No. The main thing you get is scenarios. I have an archive of scenarios I've written, be it writing for upcoming games, or be it for previous games, or be it for stuff I've just scribbled down on the back of a notepad and sort of shoved into my Google Notes and gone, oh, I'll write that one day. And I love writing scenarios because they are a mixture of a creative challenge, a mechanical challenge, and all sorts of little bits to play around with. And I realized that for a long time I was playing these battle reports, and then the scenarios would be done, and I would have done a full-on scenario with handouts for everyone, with briefings, with information on the setting. Like, even before ChargeReal came about, I was still writing like, okay, so this is your force, this is what you're up to, this is your rules of engagement, this is what you got to focus on. And then that, of course, as soon as I've used it, it goes and sits in the Google Drive forever. That is days of my life I've spent writing these things. So the idea is that I can then kind of give those out to people so they can play it themselves and either report back on it or call me out for making one side impossibly imbalanced, at which point I'll say balance is a lie and you should play what you want. But it's kind of like building these scenarios up. It's been fun to give away and see what comes of them. I fully expect some people will look at them and be like, oh, this ChargeReal stuff. Pull out the pages, focus on the gameplay. So by backing the Patreon, you get those scenarios every time I play a game. You'll also get probably at least one a month as I work through my archive to get them up to date. I originally had it that, you'd see special planning preview posts, and then realized that planning preview posts are a way of enticing people to join the Patreon rather than necessarily being a perk. So those come out for free at the start of every month, kind of as a counterpoint to my projects update that comes out on the main blog. So if you're interested in seeing what's coming up, you look at the Patreon. If you're interested in what I've been up to, what I actually got done, like the new models, etc., that's on the blog. So, for example, in this upcoming month, I am catching up on my impressions. Like, I'm looking at the Spectre Heavy Criminals, which have been sat waiting to be painted and sort of on my desk for the last month or so. And then, of course, I'm also doing the scenario conversions. I'm also going to look into some fancy stuff because we'll be playing Rangers of Shadowdeep, which is a game from the maker of Frostgrave. So we're sort of looking into a whole bunch of stuff that isn't just ultramoderns. Although, as I pitch in the doc in the Patreon intro, it's very much an ultramoderns focus on what I want to give the patrons. If people decide that actually no, we quite like the fancy stuff and it's nice to see you doing other things, then maybe I'll become less focused on like ultramoderns every month. But I still think that there is a gap in what people can read on the internet in terms of ultramoderns. So, and I'm happy to fill that gap, just as long as it's not weekly, because that was killing me to do a weekly feature post every 4 feature posts a month, whatever extra came out.
I don't know how you did that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Caffeine. Lots and lots of caffeine.
Absolutely. And it's the reason why we're doing the podcast, because we feel not on the readable but on the audible side that we can fill up this gap, that void for the ultramoderns. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, we will definitely put the link in the description. As
if you see what you like, buy Michael a cup of coffee.
Yeah, or more.
Easy enough.
A bag of
or
beans.
More resin. I don't know what he wants.
How much articles are you gonna write if we buy a bag of whole beans for coffee?
So actually, I'm not a big coffee drinker, so I prefer my caffeine to come in cola flavored and other such horrifying situations. So if you buy me a pack of beans, I might look at you a bit weird and be like, "Oh, okay, thanks."
Thanks.
But
it's the Christmas present you didn't want.
Cans of delicious Pepsi Max. Now that's what we're talking about.
And not Monster Energy. People.
Oh God, no. There's a story about Monster Energy drink and me and why I'm not allowed it anymore. And it may feature a previous job and a sponsorship and the slow, resigned sigh of every day picking up 3 cans of Monster and just slowly popping the lid and pouring it in my face so we could get rid of the damn things.
Yeah.
Eating pizza when you work at a pizza joint. I just can't do it every day.
That's true. One last question, which we have not written up. Which from all the ultramodern wargame rules would you pick as maybe your favorite currently? It's a tough question, maybe.
That is a targeted question, and I don't appreciate being ambushed by it in an interview. No, so I might get in trouble. I still think Skirmish Sanguine is my favorite set of rules. Now, there's a big asterisk on the end of that. And the asterisk is this. I have never had a bad game of Skirmish Sangam. I've had slow games. I've had games where maybe we had too many people on each side. I've had games where, someone took some landmine first move and we had to deal with it. But each of those games has been interesting in its own set way, in a way that I don't think any other rule set has ever quite grabbed me. And Spectre's great. Spectre is lovely for like, I need to get a game together. I've got time to write a scenario, but I don't want to write cards, name everyone, and do that. It's really good for just getting figures on the board, get some dice rolling, be good to go, and everyone feels super cool and tactical. I have my issues with it. No rule set is perfect, and if anyone ever tells you that, look for who's paying them. But there's lots of elements of Spectre I love, and lots of elements of Skirmish Sangam I love. There's lots of elements of like Black Ops from Osprey has some really cool elements that no one's ever covered anywhere else. And it's such a fun rule set that we got to play that at a friend's housewarming as we were all a few beers deep and had a wonderful time. So I never say, like, there's never a rule set that I'll be like, this is cast it in the fire and never look at it ever again. But I would say if you had to like put me on a desert island with all my models and one rule set, it would be Skirmish Sangam. Preferably V2 when they add some more stuff to it so I can actually play more games than like one a day. That would be fun.
Awesome. And fighting season, I guess.
Oh, that's like that's like Wilson. It's like sat there and it's like pretend to be something that's not quite real just yet. Maybe like halfway through it, I'll start making up the rules and be like, it's fine. I'll just start making rules up and we're good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, great.
Wonderful.
Whatever you do, don't put all those rule sets in a blender. That would be a very bad idea because I don't want to know what would come out of mixing D6 platoon based with D100 split section based with D6s. It would be a horrifying nightmare of a rule set.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, Michael, that was extremely interesting, and sadly we have to come to an end at some point. I think that's the, how they say in Top Gear, the bombshell at the end. Extremely interesting. I appreciate a lot you taking the time to talk with us and talk about your origins of Wargame and about the blog and everything going on. And that
it's super cool to hear the processes that are going on, behind, your blog. I mean, but hearing, about Bazistan and ChargeReal, and it's just cool hearing it. I'm not reading it. I'm talking to you, and the listeners are listening to you. So it's really
also
cool.
A lot faster because if I was reading this, it'd probably be like about a month to get everything down. And I'd be like, I just got to get this done. I have to stay up all night, and I'll get this finally finished off. And yeah, it's actually very nice to come on and talk, on the internet with people about this stuff, and we kind of be a bit more vocal about it as opposed to just simply being a written blog. I think you can probably get a lot more. I get a lot more from listening to podcasts than you do from reading, because you get to actually hear about what the podcast is feeling in terms of the way they talk about the stuff. And so hopefully you can hear from the way I talk about this stuff that I'm really interested in making more and being involved and making stuff that people want to enjoy.
Yeah, and we have the benefit which the listener do not have, is that we have even a visual confirmation of the passion. Hearing
we got him
talking.
Yeah. We got him.
Yeah.
He's been smiling the whole time. Yeah, he's been smiling the whole time.
It was lovely having you here.
Yes, thank you very much.
You have time and motivation for something else, or maybe you have something else you want to talk about in the future, then we will be glad to have you back.
Drag me onto this podcast anytime to talk about anything. You want to hear me talk about which models are best? I will come on. Do you want to hear me talk about 3D printing stuff? Let me tell you about the strange behavior you can get up to if you start mixing combat octopus kits together. I will be all in.
Awesome. Open your calendars. We'll book something here.
Yeah.
So as always, make sure you check the notes in the description for links to Michael's blog and his Patreon. Those will be in there. I think there are a couple other things we mentioned, but check it out up there. As always, you can get a hold of us at the email or on our Discord. If you're not on the Discord, check the links. It's up there. Come join us. A lot of cool boys and girls there. A lot of awesome projects going on, and just a really fun group of people to hang out with.
Yeah, we appreciate any type of feedback and construction constructive critique you have towards the podcast and things you may want to hear in the future. So feel free to write us an email or in the appropriate channel in the Discord. And as always, Ben,
keep gaming and roll some sixes.
Roll
some sixes.
What if I'm playing a different game and have to roll hundreds instead?
Then roll some hundreds for Skirmish Sanguine.
Don't fucking move! Put your hands in the air! Put your hands in the air! Put them up! Get on your knees! Hey!
Dan, did you get your handcuffs off by now? I mean, we're like an hour and a half into it. I hope you got your handcuffs off. I got mine off.
I like them. They give me.
Oh, you're gonna keep them on? Okay.
Yeah, I have so much responsibility in my life. It's nice to be dominated at some point. I think that's what the CEOs feel when they go to the special ladies.
I must admit, I was concerned about the fact you guys were opening the window throughout the entire conversation, but I can see what you're up to now. Well,
don't mind us.
I'll just have to let you go because I do enjoy listening to other podcasts that don't feature my voice. So go on. If you love something, you have to let it go.